Number 10. The Lake Cote creature video. Some mysteries become powerful because the evidence is dramatic. Others become powerful because the evidence is brief, distant, and strangely difficult to dismiss. The Lake Cote creature video belongs to the second kind. Captured in Costa Rica near Lake Cote, the footage appears to show a dark figure or object moving across the water in a way that immediately unsettled viewers. The image quality is not clear enough to provide certainty, but that uncertainty is exactly what keeps the case alive. It does not offer enough detail to resolve the question, yet it offers just enough shape, motion, and context to prevent the mystery from fading away. That is what makes the video so effective as a modern mystery. If the figure were sharper, it might be easier to identify. If it were blurrier, it might be easier to dismiss. Instead, it occupies that narrow and uncomfortable space in between, where the viewer sees too much to ignore and too little to conclude. The location contributes to the unease. A lake already invites older human fears, the fear of depth, the fear of hidden movement beneath still water, the fear that something may rise into view only for a moment, before disappearing again into a place no one can fully search. When a possible creature is added to that setting, the result feels less like ordinary misidentification and more like a fragment of an encounter that should not have happened so close to modern life. Skeptics have proposed familiar explanations. Some believe the footage may show a known animal seen at the wrong angle, while others suggest floating debris, perspective distortion, or an interpretive mistake amplified by expectation. Those explanations are reasonable, but they do not completely erase the tension in the image. The movement across the water appears purposeful enough to keep suspicion alive, and because the recording is so short and limited, there is no clean way to test the moment again. The viewer is left with a modern form of uncertainty, not the absence of evidence, but the presence of evidence too incomplete to settle itself. What keeps the Lake Cote video haunting is not that it proves a monster exists. It is that it captures the exact kind of moment on which monster stories survive. A dark shape crosses a silent body of water. The camera catches it just long enough to disturb us, and then the explanation slips away. In older centuries, a story like that would have travelled by rumour. In the modern age, it survives because the camera was there, and even now the image still does not feel finished. Number 9. The Brown Mountain Lights. Some mysteries endure because they seem supernatural at first glance, and stubbornly natural only in theory. The Brown Mountain Lights have been seen for generations in North Carolina, where glowing orbs and strange illuminations have repeatedly appeared over the landscape, drifting, hovering, and vanishing in ways that made them famous long before modern cameras began trying to capture them. That long history is part of what makes the phenomenon so compelling. The lights are not tied to one single recording or one isolated witness. They sit at the uneasy intersection of folklore, repeated observation, and modern visual evidence, which makes them feel older than a single incident, but more persistent than a simple legend. Once cameras entered the story, the mystery changed form without losing its force. Instead of existing only in testimony, the lights could now be photographed and filmed, yet the recordings did not end the debate. They only deepened it. Bright points appeared against the darkness, suspended over a mountainous landscape that already feels separated from ordinary certainty. Viewers looking at the footage are forced into the same uncertainty that witnesses experienced in person. The lights do not behave with enough clarity to be neatly categorized, but they also do not disappear into obvious fakery. They remain visible and elusive at the same time, as if the modern world has managed to preserve the mystery without truly exposing it. Many attempts have been made to explain what people are seeing. Investigators have suggested train lights, automobile headlights, atmospheric distortion, campfires, reflections, and geological or electrical causes. Some of those explanations account for certain sightings better than others, and it is entirely possible that more than one source lies behind the reports. But that is also part of the darkness surrounding the Brown Mountain Lights. A mystery becomes harder to kill when it can absorb partial explanations without collapsing. If one sighting can be explained by headlights and another by atmospheric effects, the larger pattern still survives in the public imagination because the phenomenon as a whole never seems to close. The deeper reason the brown mountain lights remain unsettling is that they belong to a landscape already shaped by distance, shadow, and silence. Mountains have a way of turning light itself into something ambiguous. A single glow in the dark can feel less like physics and more like presence. That emotional force matters because mysteries do not live by evidence alone. They live by the atmosphere surrounding the evidence, by the sense that a place may be hiding something just beyond interpretation. The brown mountain lights continue to disturb, not because every appearance is impossible, but because, after generations of sightings and years of recording, the phenomenon still feels only partly claimed by explanation. The camera can show the lights. It still cannot fully tell us why they are there. Number 8. The Norway spiral. Some mysteries feel frightening because they seem close to us. Others feel frightening because they seem impossibly large, as if the sky itself has briefly stopped behaving like the sky. The Norway spiral belongs to that second kind of modern unease. In December 2009, witnesses across northern Norway saw a strange luminous formation unfolding overhead, a bright blue spiral expanding through the darkness, with a glowing center that looked less like an ordinary atmospheric event than a deliberate design being drawn across the heavens. Photographs and video of the event spread rapidly because the image was almost too dramatic to accept. It did not resemble the vague blur of a distant light or the uncertain shape of something half-seen. It looked structured, precise, and almost unreal in its geometry. That is what gave the event such force in the public imagination. A mystery becomes especially difficult to contain when the visual evidence appears too clean for folklore and too strange for immediate comfort. The spiral seemed to open in the sky like a wound of light, and because so many people saw it from different locations, the case immediately escaped the narrow boundaries of a single witness account. This was not a hidden figure in a forest or a small object crossing water in the distance. This was a phenomenon large enough to dominate the horizon, recorded in a modern age by cameras that should have made the event easier to categorize, yet for many viewers the recordings only intensified the sense of unreality. An explanation did eventually emerge. The event was widely linked to a failed Russian missile test, with the spiral effect likely caused by fuel or exhaust spinning high in the atmosphere after the malfunction. On paper, that answer is strong and it has satisfied many observers. But the Norway spiral remains a powerful case precisely because of the gap between explanation and experience. Knowing that something may have been caused by a missile failure does not erase the visual shock of seeing the sky transformed into an immense glowing pattern that seems more like a symbol than an accident. Rational explanation can settle the cause while still leaving the emotional impact untouched. That lingering impact is what keeps the Norway spiral alive as a modern mystery image. It reminds us that even in an age of aerospace technology, military testing, and advanced physics, the sky can still produce a moment so strange that the first human instinct is not understanding, but awe mixed with dread. The camera captured it clearly, perhaps even beautifully, but clarity did not make it feel ordinary. If anything, the detailed recordings made the event more unsettling because they preserved how impossible it looked. The modern world eventually offered an answer, but the image still feels like something glimpsed from outside the limits of normal reality. Number 7. The Cumberland Spaceman photo. Some mysteries survive not because they show too much, but because they seem to show something that no one present was supposed to have seen at all. The Cumberland Spaceman photo became famous for exactly that reason. Taken in England in the 1960s, the photograph appears at first to be completely ordinary. A young girl outdoors in a quiet landscape, captured in a harmless family moment. But behind her, standing in the background, is a pale figure that looks disturbingly like a person in a spacesuit, a a shape so strange and so out of place that it transformed an ordinary image into one of the most debated photographs in modern mystery culture. That is what gives the case its enduring strength. There is nothing chaotic or dramatic in the frame. No flashing lights, no violent motion, no distorted environment demanding immediate explanation. Instead, the unease comes from contrast. The foreground is calm, familiar, and domestic. The background carries something that appears alien to the scene, as if the camera quietly captured an intrusion no one noticed in real time. Those are often the most haunting images of all, because they suggest that the strange does not always announce itself. Sometimes it enters the world silently and waits to be discovered only after the moment has already passed. Skeptics have long argued that the figure may simply be a person in light-colored clothing, perhaps the girl's mother or another nearby adult, rendered unusual by overexposure, angle, and the way the body is positioned relative to the camera. That explanation is plausible, and the history of photography is full of images transformed by perspective, accidental composition, and lighting effects. But as with so many modern mysteries, plausibility does not automatically dissolve the image's power. The figure remains visually disturbing because it does not merely look bright or blurry. It appears human and yet wrong, recognizable and yet detached from normal context, which is exactly the combination that gives an unexplained photograph long life. What keeps the Cumberland Spaceman photo haunting is not that it proves anything about extraterrestrials or hidden visitors. It is that it captures the kind of visual contradiction the mind resists. We look at the scene and feel that it should be simple, that the image ought to belong entirely to family life, daylight, and innocence, yet one shape in the frame refuses to cooperate with that expectation. The camera preserved the moment perfectly well, but meaning did not arrive with the image. Instead, the photograph became one more example of modern evidence doing something deeply uncomfortable, recording a mystery clearly enough to be remembered, but not clearly enough to be closed. Number 6. The Fresno Nightcrawler footage. Some mysteries become disturbing because they seem aggressive, while others become disturbing because they appear almost absurd at first glance and then slowly grow harder to dismiss. The Fresno Nightcrawler footage belongs to that strange category of modern evidence that feels ridiculous for a moment and unsettling for much longer after that. Captured on security cameras in California, the footage appears to show a pale, thin figure moving through the darkness with an unnatural gait, as if it consists almost entirely of legs and motion. The shape does not resemble a conventional human silhouette, and that visual oddity is what gave the clip its unusual power. Instead of looking dramatic in the familiar way of horror stories, it looks simple, silent, and wrong. That simplicity is exactly what makes the footage so effective. There is no chaos in the frame, no frantic witness narration, no obvious attempt to manufacture suspense. The camera records an ordinary patch of nighttime space, and then something enters it that seems to move with a kind of eerie innocence. The figure does not rush, threaten, or attack. It simply crosses the scene with emotion so unfamiliar that the viewer is left caught between amusement and unease. Many strange recordings can be dismissed because they try too hard to appear frightening. The Fresno Nightcrawler clip does the opposite. It is unsettling precisely because it seems so calm, as though something impossible wandered briefly into a world of security lights and suburban quiet without realizing it was being watched. Naturally, skepticism followed. Many viewers have suggested that the footage could be a hoax created with puppetry, costume work, digital manipulation, or a person moving in a deceptive way under poor visual conditions. Those explanations are entirely reasonable, especially in a modern era where fabricated video is always possible. Yet the case persists because the footage does not collapse easily into any single explanation that satisfies everyone. The motion has a peculiar consistency, the shape seems too clean in its strangeness, and the scene itself is ordinary enough to make the anomaly feel more intrusive. Even if the answer is mundane, the clip still succeeds as mystery because it reproduces one of humanity's oldest fears in a very modern form: the fear of seeing something alive that does not move the way living things should. What keeps the Fresno Nightcrawler footage alive is not the certainty that it shows an unknown creature. It is the way the recording destabilizes perception. The eye keeps trying to convert the figure into something familiar: a person, a prank, a trick of light, a puppet. But the image keeps slipping just far enough away from those categories to remain strange. In older centuries, people might have described such a sight as a spirit, a forest being, or a visitor from the unseen world. In the modern age, the language has changed, but the sensation has not. The camera caught something crossing the night, and even now the footage feels less like an answer than the beginning of a question. Number 5. The Solway Firth Spaceman. Some photographs are unsettling because they seem dramatic. Others are unsettling because they appear so ordinary that the anomaly inside them feels almost impossible to accept. The Solway Firth Spaceman photograph became famous for exactly that reason. Taken in 1964 in England, the image was meant to capture a simple family outing: a child standing outdoors in daylight with nothing in the scene suggesting danger, spectacle, or mystery. But behind the girl appears a pale, human-like figure that many viewers interpreted as resembling a person in a spacesuit, and that single detail transformed a harmless family photograph into one of the most enduring visual mysteries of the modern era. What gives the image such lasting force is the silence of the frame. Nothing about it looks staged for fear. There are no theatrical shadows, no dramatic weather, no obvious signs that the photographer was trying to capture anything except an ordinary moment. That plainness makes the anomaly more powerful because it seems to arrive uninvited. The figure in the background does not dominate the photograph. It does something more disturbing. It quietly alters the meaning of the entire image. What should have remained a memory of innocence and normality becomes charged with the possibility that the camera registered something no one noticed at the time. That is a deeply modern kind of unease, the fear that evidence may reveal an intrusion only after the event is over and beyond correction. As with many famous mystery photographs, rational explanations were offered. Some investigators argued that the figure was likely the child's mother, caught in the frame at an angle and overexposed in a way that made her clothing appear white and her body seem strangely shaped. From a photographic point of view, that explanation is plausible. Lighting, composition, and perspective have created countless deceptive images throughout the history of cameras. But plausibility does not always erase atmosphere. The Solway Firth photo continues to haunt public imagination because the figure still looks alien to the scene in a way that the eye struggles to reduce to accident. The more ordinary the setting feels, the more disturbing the unexplained presence becomes. What keeps the Solway Firth Spaceman alive as a mystery is not proof of extraterrestrial visitation or some dramatic hidden event. It is the uncomfortable tension between domestic normality and visual intrusion. The photograph invites us to trust it because it looks so harmless, and then it quietly denies that trust by containing something that feels misplaced inside reality. In that sense, the image captures a fear older than modern technology, but sharpened by it. The fear that the world may contain presences we do not notice in the moment, only later when the evidence is already fixed and the explanation has become uncertain. The camera preserved the day exactly as it appeared, and yet what appeared still refuses to feel settled. Number 4. The Phoenix Lights. Some modern mysteries become unforgettable not because they were seen by one person in isolation, but because they were witnessed by so many people at once that disbelief itself begins to feel strained. The Phoenix Lights belong to that category of mass unease. In 1997, enormous formations of lights were reported moving over Arizona, with countless witnesses describing a vast, silent object, or a sequence of lights arranged in a way that felt structured, deliberate, and far too large to dismiss as an ordinary misunderstanding. Videos and photographs emerged, but the real force of the event came from the scale of shared perception. This was not a hidden figure in the corner of a photograph, or a strange shape caught in a few seconds of low-quality footage. This was something that seemed to enter public space on such a scale that entire communities were left staring upward, unsure whether they were watching aircraft, illusion, or something far harder to name. That is what makes the Phoenix Lights so powerful in the history of modern, unexplained phenomena. The event combines two forms of evidence that do not always appear together so strongly: visual recordings and large numbers of witnesses. Usually a mystery survives because footage is ambiguous, or because witness testimony is impossible to verify. In this case, both persisted side by side. People described a formation that appeared immense and strangely silent, moving with a smoothness that did not feel natural to ordinary air traffic, while cameras recorded lights suspended over the night in a way that seemed too organized to become immediately harmless. The modern world should have been well equipped to explain such an event quickly. Instead, the more the case was discussed, the more it exposed the gap between recorded image, human experience, and official explanation. Explanations were offered, most famously that at least part of what witnesses saw may have been military flares dropped during training exercises. That answer accounts for some of the visible lights in some recordings, and it remains the most widely accepted explanation in official and skeptical interpretations. But what kept the case alive was the widespread feeling that not all witnesses were describing the same thing, or at least not only the thing explained by flares. Some insisted that they saw a massive craft-like formation passing overhead before the later stationary lights appeared, and this distinction became central to the mystery. Once a case splits into multiple layers, one partly explained and another still emotionally unresolved, it becomes very difficult to close completely. What continues to make the Phoenix Lights haunting is that they represent a modern nightmare of uncertainty on a collective scale. It is one thing to question the perception of a single frightened observer. It is another to confront an event in which large numbers of people believe they saw something extraordinary crossing the night above a major populated region. The camera preserved the lights, but the recordings never fully captured the scale of what many said they felt in that moment. The sense that something vast had entered the sky and passed over ordinary life without offering a clear identity. That is why the Phoenix Lights remain one of the darkest modern camera mysteries. Even after years of debate, explanation has never felt quite large enough to match the experience. Number 3. The Dyatlov Pass photographs. Some mysteries are frightening because they show the unknown directly, but others are more disturbing because they preserve the world just before the unknown closes in. The Dyatlov Pass photographs belong to that second kind of darkness. Taken by the hikers before their deaths in the Ural Mountains in 1959, the images themselves do not provide a clear supernatural spectacle or a visible monster in the frame. Instead, they offer something more psychologically powerful. Fragments of ordinary expedition life preserved on film before a catastrophe that still resists full explanation. Smiling faces, snow-covered slopes, movement through the wilderness, the simple rhythm of a difficult journey, all of it now feels charged with dread because the viewer knows what the people in the photographs do not. They are moving toward one of the most famous and unsettling mysteries of the modern age. That is what gives these photographs such a unique and haunting quality. They are not mysterious because they obviously reveal the cause of death. They are mysterious because they preserve innocence in the presence of a future horror. When modern audiences look at them, every detail becomes loaded with retrospective fear. A pose in the snow no longer looks casual. A patch of landscape no longer seems empty. A moment of routine preparation begins to feel like the last calm edge before reality breaks. The camera did not capture the final truth of what happened at Dyatlov Pass, but it did capture the final visible world of the people who entered that truth and never returned. That makes the photographs less like evidence in the narrow forensic sense and more like visual thresholds into uncertainty. Over the years, many theories have tried to explain the deaths. avalanche scenarios, infrasound, military testing, panic triggered by environmental forces, human conflict, and stranger possibilities have all been proposed with varying degrees of seriousness. Some explanations account for important details better than others, and modern investigations have tried to move the case toward a more natural conclusion. But the photographs remain powerful because they resist emotional closure even when theory advances. They show the expedition not as a solved event, but as a human reality interrupted. The images are still, but they feel unstable because the viewer keeps searching them for clues that may not be there, as if the camera might somehow have noticed the danger before the hikers themselves did. What keeps the Dyatlov Pass photographs so disturbing is that they make uncertainty intimate. The mystery is not floating high in the sky or moving through darkness at a distance. It is embedded in human faces, human gestures, and a harsh landscape that suddenly feels as though it may be concealing forces beyond ordinary understanding. These photographs remind us that a camera does not need to capture the decisive moment to become part of a mystery. Sometimes it is enough for it to preserve the final ordinary images before the world turns strange. In that sense, the Dyatlov photographs may be among the darkest modern recordings of all, because they do not show us what happened. They show us the last moments before explanation disappeared into snow, silence, and death. Number 2. The Nellis Range UFO footage. Some modern mysteries remain disturbing because they seem to emerge from places where mystery should have the least room to survive. The Nellis Range UFO footage carries exactly that kind of tension. Recorded near the Nevada Test and Training Range, an area already surrounded by secrecy, military control, advanced aviation, and decades of speculation. The footage appears to show an unusual object moving through the sky in a way that immediately drew attention. The recording is grainy and limited, like so many pieces of modern mystery evidence, but that limitation does not weaken the case. In some ways, it strengthens it. The object seems to move with enough strangeness to provoke fascination, yet the image remains uncertain enough that the viewer cannot step cleanly into confidence. It is caught in that same narrow territory where the most enduring mysteries survive, too visible to ignore and too incomplete to settle. That setting matters more than it might in an ordinary sighting. A strange light or object seen over a random landscape can often be placed into familiar categories of error, but a recording connected to one of the most secretive military environments in the world immediately acquires a heavier atmosphere. Places shaped by restricted airspace, experimental technology, and official silence are natural breeding grounds for public suspicion because they encourage a simple and uncomfortable possibility. Even if what was seen was not extraordinary in the supernatural sense, it may still belong to a world the public is not meant to understand. That alone is enough to keep the footage alive because mystery grows easily in the space between what is visible and what is acknowledged. Skeptical explanations have never been absent. Some argue that the footage likely shows an aircraft, atmospheric distortion, equipment limitations, or a mundane object viewed under unusual conditions. In a military testing environment, those explanations are not only plausible but often probable. Yet probability does not always dissolve mystery. The Nellis footage remains powerful because it captures a form of uncertainty uniquely modern in character. The camera appears to record something real, but reality itself is split into possibilities that remain inaccessible to the viewer. Is the object misidentified, classified, experimental, or simply misunderstood? The recording offers presence without transparency, and that is often more unsettling than total ignorance. What keeps the Nellis Range footage haunting is not that it proves alien visitation or some impossible intrusion into the modern sky. It is that it traps the viewer between two equally disturbing possibilities. Either the object represents something genuinely strange that escaped ordinary explanation, or it belongs to a hidden human world of technology and secrecy so advanced or so protected that public understanding cannot reach it. In either case, the result is the same. The camera captured something above one of the most secretive landscapes in America, and even now the footage feels less like a solved sighting than a reminder that modern power can make mystery deeper, not smaller. Number 1. The Hessdalen lights. Some mysteries endure because they are dramatic, some because they are terrifying, and some because they have survived long enough to become almost impossible to dismiss without completely satisfying anyone who studies them. The Hessdalen lights stand at the top of this list because they represent one of the strangest and most persistent marriages between modern recording technology and unexplained visual phenomena. For decades, strange lights have been reported in the Hessdalen Valley of Norway, where glowing objects and luminous forms have appeared in the sky, sometimes drifting, sometimes hovering, sometimes moving with a behavior that seems too structured to feel comfortable and too inconsistent to feel fully understood. Unlike many isolated camera mysteries that rely on a single famous image, the Hessdalen phenomenon gained power through repetition. It was seen again and again, filmed again and again, and studied again and again, which should have pushed it toward a final answer. Instead, it remained suspended in uncertainty. That is what makes the case so exceptional. The modern world is usually confident that repeated observation will weaken mystery. If something can be recorded multiple times, measured, discussed, and approached with scientific attention, then explanation should eventually narrow around it until the unknown disappears. But Hessdalen does not fit neatly into that pattern. Cameras have captured the lights, instruments have attempted to study them, investigators have proposed atmospheric, geological, electrical, and plasma-based explanations. Some of those ideas may account for parts of the phenomenon, and it is entirely possible that the lights emerge from rare but natural interactions within the valley's environment. Yet the case remains unsettling, because even where explanation has advanced, complete closure has not arrived with the force people expect. The mystery has not lived only in rumor, it has survived contact with observation. The valley itself contributes to the atmosphere in a way that cannot be ignored. Remote landscapes already carry a visual language of isolation, silence, and exposure, and when strange lights begin appearing repeatedly over such a place, the environment seems to absorb them into something almost mythic. But Hessdalen is not merely mythic. That is why it is darker than an ordinary legend. It occupies the uncomfortable ground where folklore touches instrument readings, where witness testimony meets repeated documentation, and where the camera preserves enough reality to force seriousness without preserving enough clarity to end wonder. The lights do not seem like one accidental photograph or one misinterpreted event. They feel like a phenomenon the modern world has been watching for years without fully mastering. What makes the Hessdalen lights worthy of the #1 position is that they expose the deepest fear hidden inside all modern camera mysteries. We assume that if something is real enough to be recorded, then time and technology will eventually strip away its uncertainty. Hessdalen suggests that this confidence may be incomplete. The camera can return to the same valley again and again, the lights can appear again and again. The observers can become more careful, the instruments more refined, the theories more sophisticated, and still the phenomenon can remain partly outside our grasp. That is what makes the case so powerful and so unsettling. It is not just a strange image caught once in the dark. It is a modern mystery that endured the gaze of the camera, the patience of investigators, and the pressure of explanation, and still refused to fully surrender its meaning.